Archivos, the new story development application from WonderThink Studios, will change the way you look at stories. Archivos takes a different approach to documenting your story setting. While most wikis and storytelling frameworks focus on documenting the elements of your stories, Archivos is more interested in the connections between those story elements. It's the relationships between characters and places and events that express the true structure and allure of your stories. As a storyteller, that's the awareness you need to strengthen and refine the crafting of your stories. Archivos really is the story development tool for today's storytellers. Learn more about Archivos at www.archivos.digital. That's ARCHIVOS.digital. Archivos. Your stories illuminated.
Welcome to PseudoPod, where the only thing more horrifying than horror is the possibility you might push through a story that makes you uncomfortable or actively disturbs you. Don't. We're here to entertainingly disturb, not straight up disturb, and you can always hop back on next week. PseudoPod, episode 556, August 18th, 2017. This week's story, Evitative, by B.C. Edwards. Hello everyone, welcome to PseudoPod, the weekly horror podcast. I'm Alasdair, your host, and this week's story requires a short but perfectly formed grammar lesson. This is what B.C. Edwards passed along for us, and I've never heard of this before, and it's really interesting. Evitative is the titular and ultimate story of the Aversive Clause, the collection of stories that also included Sweetness, which ran as PseudoPod episode 445. And evitative itself is a form of grammar. It's tremendously rare and primarily found in some Australian Aboriginal languages and some other languages that are primarily spoken rather than written. It's also referred to as the aversive case and is used to denote that the noun so marked is something to be feared. Here's an example. I ran out of the cave to get away from the bear. One would attach the aversive suffix to the end of bear, so the audience of the story would know to be afraid. I found this endlessly fascinating. This is the only instance that I know of where grammar has been used to convey emotion. This story, and the entire collection, deals with forms of disquiet and discomfort, both internal and external, and I thought that the concept of the evitative case captured that sentiment pretty handily. I am a huge nerd for stuff like this, and I'm incredibly grateful to BC for giving us that really detailed and completely comprehensible breakdown of something which otherwise would have made me go slightly cross-eyed. BC is the author of 2 books, The Aversive Clause and From the Standard Cyclopedia of Recipes. He has written for Mathematics Magazine, Hobart, The New York Times, and others. His debut story collection, which this is the titular story of, was awarded the Hudson Prize for Fiction and received a poetry fellowship from the New York Foundation of the Arts. He attended the graduate writing program at the New School in New York and lives in Brooklyn with his husband. His website, bce.nyc, totally exists, but that's really all that should be said about it. It's in desperate need of a redo. I totally feel you on that one. Also, and this is a personal note that BC passed along, I've been listening to audial fiction for longer than I've been listening to music. I read Moby Dick, Huckleberry Finn, Treasure Island, the works of Issac Asimov, Ray Bradbury, Stephen King, and countless others in this form, starting around 4 and continuing on to today. My work is always written with the intention of being read aloud, so it's really something to have a pair of stories in the PseudoPod archive. Thanks for keeping both horror and the spoken word going strong at the same time. Thanks, BC. We couldn't do it without you, and we couldn't do it without our listeners and narrators. And speaking of narrators, the mighty Dani Daly, one of the elite Cast of Wonders team here at Escape Artists, is your reader for this week. So, get ready, because BC, Dani, and we have a story for you. And we promise you, it's true.
Evitative by B.C. Edwards. Most times, I know what Jojo is thinking. He comes back with a clutch of dead birds and grunts, hungry. He looks at me and grunts, love. He thumps at my growing belly with his knobby, dirty fingers and grunts, afraid. That's Jojo in a nutshell, pretty much. I tell him to climb down one of the trees and mark it where the water was, and then mark it again just above that. When they're both gone after a few days, Jojo spends all that morning pacing our little platform and grunting, worried about the water rising up to meet us. The men in the canoes can't figure out how Jojo's been climbing up and down. He's pretty clever with his footholds. But as soon as the water's high enough, they'll hook the branches with their ugly, bent paddles and be up easy. If that happens, I'm not sure what I'll do. I don't pace our little platform, though. I focus all my worrying on rubbing my belly and feeling the baby inside squirm and flail its little arms and legs. Jojo said it would be fine, that we'd be safe, he and I. Well, he grunted at least. He'd already lost his words by then. Grunted, safe. Grunted, fun. He's been like this since he found me. Probably since the bombs and water and all. Once the oceans came up and covered the streets over, it was like they weren't ever there. No streets, or dead Camaros, or boys that abandon you when things get flooded and break down. There were just the tall trees with the high branches and water everywhere, and the smudge of mountains I could see off in the horizon if I climb all the way to the top of the tree we used for looking at things. The water filled in all the gaps and erased our telemarketing jobs and our high heels and the clubs we wore them to. But we're safe up here, on the little platform Jojo built in the trees. He found me wandering in the muck, cold and alone, and his was the first face that I'd seen in forever that didn't look scared or desperate or tired. The first one, since the water and the bombs and all, who didn't try to take one more thing from me, didn't try to steal me away or trick me into anything. Jojo just smiled, and his eyes smiled too. And even though he'd lost his words already, I knew he meant well. And he showed me how to climb the trees and get up to his platform, where there's nothing to do but climb around, eat the berries and the apple-ish things that dangle off the branches like Christmas ornaments, and screw all afternoon long, and laze about watching the world disappear. Jojo catches the birds that build their nests and try to eat our fruit, and then we eat the birds too. That's about all we do. That's about all the kid in my belly will do too. But the kid won't know any different. It won't think there was ever something other than the trees and the muck and the water and the men who come by every now and again in their canoes and their ugly paddles and their terrible, broken whispers. You can't go down there. Those men will eat you. That will be the first thing I tell it, whatever knocks around inside me. That will be lesson 1. Lesson 2 is going to be about the berries and the apples that grow in the trees. Jojo catches the birds and kills and cooks them, and then makes little dolls out of the feathers and the bones. Every doll tells me that Jojo is still enough himself to be in love with me, even without his words and all. They try to look like people, Jojo's dolls, but more and more they are just lumps of stick and muck and bird wound together in awkward shapes with vine. Still, he spends hours each day, after he's done catching and eating, but before he's sleeping, tying them together, and then lining them up in a neat row above the crib that I've built in the crib tree, using the best branches we find, and also whatever bits we gathered from before the bombs and the water and all that. White plastic spoons around the brim, cracked CDs, and loose bits of metal dangling down on tired strings, so the baby'll have something to look at when it's lying on its back and doesn't know how to roll over yet. We found a blanket with a duck stitched on it, and a dusty pillow, and Jojo and I squalled about who got it. But now it stays in the crib, waiting for the baby to crawl out. But sometimes I catch Jojo sneaking it and wrapping it around himself. And I don't yell, because those times he looks so gentle. Jojo looks almost like he might have his words back. He looks like when he found me that first time. Like when he grunted fun and safe and fine. The men in the canoes come around afternoons mostly, when Jojo's off catching. Their paddles are stick and bone. Bones with thick flaps of skin stretched across them to catch the water so the men can really move, slaloming between the trunks of the forest which rise out of the water straight and smooth, like they're angry. The canoes are curved wood and more stretched skin stretched tight, so the hull makes like a skinny boy's ribs all along the boat, or like my ribs these days. Stretched so tight along the wood that it seems the people the skin came off of must still be screaming at the pain. Lesson 1 is definitely don't ever go down there. Lesson 2 is about the apples and the berries. Lesson 3 is to stick your tongue out at Jojo when he's being difficult. Stick your tongue out and scowl at him dark. But save your words. Save your words for when you're really mad. Because your words hurt him. Because Jojo lost his. The bombs blew them right out of his mouth. The water washed his tongue so clean that all he's got left is grunts. So save your words for when it's really bad. Because that's how you hurt Jojo the most. That's lesson 3. Assuming the thing in my belly even has words. Which it might not, I suppose. But I hope it does. I hope that more than almost anything. When he puts his arms around me as we sleep, Jojo coos instead of grunts, and occasionally nibbles on my ears, and I fall asleep smiling. Once morning comes, though, Jojo is tense and perching and sorting through the fire pit and getting his sticks ready to catch the birds. He goes out, and the men paddle by, and I peer over, and my hair drips down, knotted and dirty and twisted, and I wonder if they can see my eyes from there, because I can see theirs. Especially the young one, whose are bright blue, and his hair is curly and black and shiny. And it's like maybe he's not the same monster as them. His eyes are clear and sweet, and when he smiles, his curls duck under his cheeks like a bonnet, and his teeth aren't cracked yet, and he hasn't said much to me, but I bet he doesn't have that same terrible lisp. I bet that when they are all floating through the forest, they tell each other stories. They tell each other what they were like before the bombs and the water and all. They remind each other that it wasn't all an imaginary world, that it hasn't been just this forever. 'Cause that's what I think, more and more these days. I think that before the bombs and the water and all, there was just more water, and all the broken Camaros and the boys who left you alone are just dreams. I bet that there are whole families of the men and their canoes living on the mountains that cut off the horizon. Sometimes I climb to the top of the looking tree and try to find them paddling through the forest and out. I don't know where they go at nights, or where they sleep. Between us and the mountains, there's mostly nothing but water, gray and thick, and reflecting the sun like grease might. Bombs were set off over the Arctic, they said. Madmen or wars, we never really knew. Melted all the ice, heated the whole world up, and brought all this water. Some days I believe it, Some days I don't. I don't know what Jojo believes. He doesn't grunt about things like that. Our berries are red and blue and green. They don't taste like anything I remember from before. But I lost my foods the way Jojo lost his words. I woke up one morning, and they were gone. All the flavors washed out white and empty, covered over by trees and berries and bits of bird. The men drift by most days to see how close they are. They talk to each other in their hissing, broken whispers, and reach up with their paddles and try to get at the branches, but there is still a long way to go. If they come by too early, Jojo throws things at the men. Green berries, stones from our fire pit, a bunch of heavy rocks arranged so we can cook and not burn our forest down. Whatever he can get his hands on. He throws things and grunts rage, but the men see through his act. They laugh up at him, wave their paddles about, whistle, and smack their lips and catcall. They tease Jojo that he's lost his words. They ask me what I'm doing with him. I don't answer back. I don't call down that I love Jojo, or that I've spent longer than I can count building the platform with him, making it ready for the kid in my belly to crawl out. I don't call down because I know that they'll laugh at me too. They'll tell me stories of all the people on the mountains, on the horizon way off. So many, they'll say, everyone with their words and families and children for the children to play with. And I'll ache like nothing I've ever known at the thought of that. I dream most nights, when it's quiet and dark so that I can't see my toes and there's nothing else to do but dream. Some nights, I can't even tell if I've closed my eyes. That's how dark it gets. Sometimes I dream that it's like before the bombs and the water. Moms and dads and cookies and pajamas and all that. Boys and dates and Camaros and kissing and fooling around. But they are stiffer every time I dream them. They are eerie, plastic dreams. The world has been cast and molded and set to cool, permanent and unchanging. Neighbors and lawns, dogs and paperboys, as if someone is playing with a perfect, complete set of dolls. Sometimes I dream like it's any day, and all the days are the same. I pick the berries and make the fire and climb to the top of the looking tree and look out across the long stretch of water to the mountains off at the horizon. I wonder if the men in the canoes will come by and if their paddles are long enough yet. And then Jojo comes back with his birds, and at some point I wake up and do all of those things, and it's hard to figure which me is the dream and which isn't. Sometimes, though, I know I'm dreaming and can't do anything about it. I'm hungry. Hungry, like a heavy, sopping quilt is covering every bit of me. I'm hungry and I can't imagine there being a time when I won't be hungry. Not ever. It will only grow heavier, more urgent. And even if I rake our forest barren, I'll always be hungry like this, even after I'm dead. And my jaw itches for a certain food, and I'm all alone, and Jojo's off somewhere, or dead, or something, and the thing in my belly comes out, and I'm just so hungry. And I can't wake up until I'm done with what happens next, no matter how much I try. That's what I dream, more and more these days. And I wake up screaming, and Jojo's there, and he's looking at me like he doesn't know what I am, and he points at my belly and grunts afraid, like always. But I don't stick my tongue out like I would, normal, because those days I believe him more than I don't. Some nights, when it's dark like that, and I'm afraid to go to sleep because of what might happen, I talk to Jojo, real quiet so he can't hear, so my words don't hurt. But sometimes I need to hear myself saying things. I tell him what I still remember of what I used to do before the bombs and the water and all. How I rode the bus to school almost every day, and then rode a different bus to work at the telemarket. And when I went out at night, the boy in the Camaro would pick me up, and I'd ride my hand out the window like a snake running through water. And whenever I'd say something like water, or trees, or birds, I'd shudder. I talk about when he found me, lost and scared and wandering around, his sweet eyes the first good thing I'd seen in forever. About how I'd lost my shoes and been turned away from every house that was still standing, and the people were turning ugly. I say how much I loved that he brought me up, how special I felt, like I was chosen, specific. Jojo appeared out of nowhere and tugged on my sleeve and looked at me. And it was his eyes that got me following him up to his little platform in the trees. It was tiny at first, nothing more than a couple of planks. But we set about immediately making it bigger and stronger and beautiful. We climbed down and scoured the mud for useful bits. Extension cords to lash the branches together, long planks to make walkways from tree to tree. We started gathering berries and catching birds with traps made from claws at the end of long poles. We found routes through the trees from one end of our small forest to the other, and we realized that we were the only ones up here. No other platforms. While there was still ground and still people wandering, Jojo and I would spend the days watching them aimlessly shuffle between the trees and along the paths and roads, pushing wheelbarrows filled with all the bits they were able to scavenge. We would lie on our bellies and peer over our platform. Jojo would grunt, smug and laughing, and I'd stick my tongue out, and he'd grunt it again, and I'd laugh this time. Then he would curl his hand around mine, and then we'd screw loudly, screeching like animals to scare the people shuffling around, make them think there were monsters up above. And we'd eat our birds, and laugh, and coo, and fall asleep happy and twined together. And the larger our platform grew, the more I liked it, the better it got. The water was slow at first, then faster and more. Once it really started coming, everyone left, and all their wheelbarrows tipped over, and their contents either sank or floated away. Dolls that had been orphaned rode the water with only their enormous plastic heads above the oily surface, the beanbag bodies forced to travel underneath, tiny, bent icebergs with broken eyes. And Jojo and I watched from our growing platform, playing in the trees and picking berries. Once they were gone, the people who abandoned the wheelbarrows and the dolls who floated away, we stopped screwing so loudly. We stopped growing the platform because there were no more planks to pull up from the muck. Then the kid started in my belly, and I lost all my foods, and the men came by in their canoes, and now it's very serious. And when Jojo grunts, it's usually scared, or frustrated, or angry. I think if I stayed on the ground and shuffled around with everyone else, that maybe I'd have a canoe of my own. A canoe, and something beautiful, like the boy with the curls driving me through the forest. I climb to the top of the looking tree, and I can see the mountains so far off that they may as well not be there at all. but it's the only ground I've got. Jojo collects broken watches. Or he did before the men in the canoes came along. Jojo stopped going down to the water so they wouldn't figure out how to get up to us. He hides the watches all through the branches of the mourning tree. And when it's clear, and I'm up early enough, the sun rising through the branches hits all the gold and silver bands and sparkles on us in shifting, watery patterns, like the disco balls at the clubs with the boy and his Camaro. If Jojo's not around, the men are usually sweet. Come down, they say. Come down, and we'll be nice to you. Come down for a ride, and we'll have a pleasant day of it. Come down, and we won't eat you. We promise. Come down, and there is steak and eggs and lobster and bacon sandwiches, and I don't know what those things taste like, but I know that they're delicious. Come down, and you won't have to catch another bird or eat another tree berry. Not ever. Come down, and we'll take you to the mountains where there are hundreds and hundreds of people and children for the children to play with. The men's teeth have all been cracked to points from gnawing too deep on bones, so every word is lisped and hushed. It's nice to hear something other than Jojo grunting, though. And their offer is as tempting as the quilt in my dreams is heavy, but I don't answer back. I just peek over the edge of the platform, my hair dangling down towards them. They'll take care of us, they say. Me and that thing in my belly. They'll take care of us. Take care. I wonder what they mean by that. I peer over the edge of the platform on the planks that used to be roofs and walls and floors and shacks. I peer over while the men are there, and for a long while after they leave. Sometimes the water stills so much that I can see our platform reflected in its gray grease. And then, if I look for too long, I see this thing peering over the side, with the dirty, cracked face, and long, knotted hair dangling, and wild eyes. And we just stare at each other, it and me, for a very long time, until I finally realize what it is. And then I scream until Jojo comes back through the trees and holds me and grunts, "Love." I bet they'll eat Jojo. He's got some good meat on him. We have to be careful when we sleep. The bit right next to the bed is rotting out and has gone all mushy and feels like it's going to give whenever it wants to. I tell Jojo to fix it, but he just grunts, not knowing what I'm saying. And I don't believe him for a moment. Jojo just grunts and pulls me in closer to him while we sleep. Some nights, after the fire's gone down and it's quiet except for the burble of water on the trunks, Jojo will pull me in and doze off, and before I doze off too, I squeeze at his arms around me. I see how full they are, how plump, how much meat there is. And it's been so long since I've had proper food, I think. And I get that ache right at the crux of my jaw, behind the teeth, where the gum starts. A dull ache that doesn't go away even when I clench my teeth together so tight that they might shatter. Nights like that I dream terrible and wake up screaming, and Jojo grunts worried, and then soothing, and then love. And the thing in my belly kicks and flails with all its different parts, and that's nice for once, because it means that it's still there, and I didn't do any of the things I thought I might have done, or thought I might have wanted to. But still, there's good meat on Jojo. They'll definitely want to eat him. They won't eat me, they say. If only I'll come down, they'll take care of it all. They'll take me to the mountains and everywhere else. Wherever I want to go, they say. If only I'll come down and join them. Then we hear Jojo in the trees, riding along the branches, showing off how good he is at that. The men, and that one with the pretty eyes, paddle off quick, because if they loiter, Jojo will throw green berries and stones from the pit. He's got good aim, and a hard arm, and one time hit a man square on the forehead with a large heavy rock. I heard the crack against his skull all the way up, and there was this gurgle and gasp, and the man keeled right over and into the water, and didn't move after that. For a time, the men poked him with their paddles, but he didn't turn, or roll over, or swim, or tread, or anything, and the water began to still around him. The men in the canoes, and that younger one, stared at each other, and at the body floating, but only for a moment. And then, at once, they set on it growling and moaning like a pack of dogs. Jojo ran off, grunting, disgust, and afraid. But I watched, peering over the side of our platform, my hair stinking like moss and barely moving in the breeze. My jaw ached, and I was hungry like in the dream. It was all through me. My toes were hungry, my elbows, my breasts, starving. I watched the way they tore into him so perfectly, so skilled with the knives. They slit and poured him out, carved him and carried his dripping pieces, and left the ruin behind. The water turned an awful patchy brown, like the blood and the water didn't want to mix. When they paddled off, the younger one with the eyes and the curly hair stayed back for a moment. The paddle in his hand froze in mid-stroke, dripping and waiting for the water. But he stayed, looked up, and stared at me so direct it could have been for an hour. More, maybe. His soft, bright eyes were full and round and awestruck, like he had already eaten 20 times over. 20 steaks, 20 lobsters, 20 bacon, 20 milkshakes. The thought of the meal to come was enough for him. The butchery itself was enough. And I was hungry everywhere. And I wondered if he got the same satisfied look every time he carved someone out. I wondered if I would get that same look. His eyes were stuffed, wet and glorious, and he pouted his lips out and waved one small wave goodbye with the tips of his hands still coated. And he didn't stop looking until he was gone, and I didn't stop seeing his blue, bright, satisfied eyes until I woke up screaming and crying and tearing at my belly. I go back there day after day and swear the water is still brown from the carcass, and the itch at the back of my jaw, and the hunger rolling along me like clouds. And I stare at the patch, and when the water stills, the reflection that stares back up at me is more terrible than ever. Her eyes are wicked, but calmer and clearer, and I'm so frightened of her. Jojo's afraid that the thing in my belly will be hungry, like the men are. It won't be content to stay on the platform and eat the birds and the berries. It will chip its teeth on bones and speak in the same cracked whispers. Some days, after the men paddle off, I get hungry like that. It hits me strong like a wind, and I sit there, not making a fire, not building up the crib at the crib tree, just sitting and staring at my belly until Jojo comes home and I look at him, and I can tell it's bad because I don't know what he's grunting. Love, or worry, or happy, or hope. It's all just grunts. And it doesn't seem like he's Jojo either. Just a thing walking around with sacks of meat dripping off his skeleton, waiting to be cut loose, waiting to be devoured. And I can tell he sees it in me. There's got to be a look to my eyes, or the way I'm rubbing at my belly. And he used to come to me and wrap his gangly arms around me and grunt soothing and grunt calm. But most days now, he gives me a wide berth, stays on the other side of our little platform, or just jumps back up into the trees and goes out for more birds and waits till I'm calm again. And I sleep, and I try not to dream that one dream, and I wake up to the speckled light from the watches coming through the morning tree, and I feel how big my stomach's getting, and lay on my back. Wait for Jojo to go to the bird trees. Wait for the men to paddle by. The younger one moving so sure through the flooded forest. They'll make it all right, they say. They've got room in the canoes. They can find plenty to eat, they say. No more berries. No more birds. I want to call down and ask them to take me to the mountain that smudges the sky. Ask them to take me to the city and all the people. But I don't call out. I'm scared that I've lost the words, that I'm like Jojo, and I won't be able to do anything but grunt. And the men will point and laugh and disappear between the trees. Leave me with the baby kicking away and Jojo grunting, scared, every time it does. They'll float and leave me with the memory of shining, satisfied eyes until that fades away, like all the food in the world. And it will be me and Jojo and the kid and the patch of brown water that won't clear out. And I'll be alone and quiet. I wake up in the morning, groggy and bleary. But I know Jojo is gone. The air smells different. It smells like he's not there, hasn't ever been there. It smells like someone else, someone wet. One of the men is sitting in Jojo's spot, using a knife to sharpen a twig. He's an expert with the blade. The thinnest slivers of wood flick off at the edge and float down around his legs. He's staring at me, intent and curious, not saying anything, just flicking with the knife and absently grinding his teeth, making the sound of dead birds when Jojo rips out handfuls of feathers. His teeth are jagged and broken, and it must be like licking a bread knife to run his tongue over them. I want to look over the edge of our platform and see where his friends are, search out the trunks and see if they're on their way up or already lurking around me. I want to see if Jojo's been strung up, poured out, and made ready for dinner. I wonder which thing will look back up from the water, which reflection. But I don't do any of that. Just sit. There was a fight, he whispers. It is forever since I felt the quick shot of breath that accompanies words. There was a fight and we left. I nod. That's all I've got to do right now. The words are all stuck in the back of my throat. The rest of them are gone, he whispers. We'll be fine, though. It will all be fine. And I know he's right. We will be fine. All of us will be fine. We can go to the city on the mountain that cuts the horizon, and there will be people with words, and children for the children to play with. And we will be fine. They're gone, he says again, and I just sit there, and he sharpens the twig. We thought you had a nice setup. Once we found the way up, we thought, why not join? The knife thwicks through the stick. The trees are all so quiet, waiting to see what happens next. That's what we were thinking, that you had a real nice setup. And I want to know what it's like to move through the trees, so smooth and graceful like they do in their canoes. And I'm about ready to say that. I'm about to say that I'm ready. And I hear it right behind me. I hear feet and feel something like a shadow crawl across my back. And I know what it is. And that it's got the prettiest hair and the nicest, bluest eyes. And those eyes are wide, I know, and staring down at me. And they are full of love. I turn around, belly and all, whip real fast. And there he is. Younger than I thought from way up. Younger than me. Still a boy, in fact. He's smiling so that his hair curls under his cheeks, which are flushed from climbing and sneaking. His eyes are as big and wet as I'd dreamed. They are a blue that doesn't exist anymore. But his eyes aren't looking at me. They are on my stomach. They are looking through it, digging inside it. His eyes are full again with anticipation. They look as though he's eaten 100 birds, like he'll never have to eat another thing. They are full, the way Jojo's are after we screw. The angelic boy with his curly dark hair smiles a boy's horrible smile, and I can see where his teeth have started to crack, just slightly, from the bones and the gnashing. And I know that when the man with the stick said, "We are going to be fine," he didn't mean Jojo, and he didn't mean me, and he didn't mean the thing crawling inside my belly. And the city, and the mountains, and the people, and the canoes, and the lobsters, and all the hunger in the world wash out of me, and I'm left like a husk. My belly kicks, and I feel a growl pull up from my throat where all my words are caught. A growl that doesn't mean anything that I'd have words for. A growl that emerges more a bark, sharp and hard and sudden, and the young thing tears away from my belly, and he sees me. His eyes on mine, and the fear washes out his color, and he steps back. And I'm glad that Jojo never got around to fixing that spot behind where I sleep that's going all soft and to rot. For a moment he's there, eyes wide, lips parted, pouting. And then he's gone, and he doesn't make a sound as he falls through the trees. I whip back around, and the one with the knife has stopped with the twig, and he's not smiling, just staring at the spot on the platform where it's mushy. And the glint is out of his eyes now, and he doesn't realize that Jojo's dropped out of the morning tree, quiet the way that he is when he's catching birds. And then Jojo's got his enormous hands around the man's head, and then he's twisted it around all the way and tossed the body off the platform the way he does when he's done eating. Jojo cocks his head and looks at me, and then at his knobby, long hands, as if he's never seen them before. And he rocks back on the balls of his feet and howls up at the sky like he's done something big. That night, he goes down and catches us some fish, and I've got another taste in my head. And Jojo curls and twines around me and grunts love into my hair over and over again until he's fast asleep. And I doze off, telling him how happy I was when he found me with his gentle eyes and tugged on my sleeve and brought me up to his little platform. The two of them float down there for a few days, caught on some underroots, until the currents tear them away and carry them off. I imagine them floating all the way out to the smudge of mountains where they said they'd built a town. Imagine them being strung up and sliced open and carved out. And when I do, that same feeling courses through me. A hunger so deep and cut down to the bone. It's as though I'll never not be hungry again.
There are very few subgenres I love more than stories about what happens after the world ends. That complicated, ragged, torn edge of humanity that's always left behind. Sometimes it's Max Rokitansky, sometimes it's Furiosa, sometimes it's Christian Bale and a near unrecognisable pre-Jim Gerard Butler hiding from dragons in a castle. Sometimes it's a father and son, their belongings in a filthy shopping trolley, telling each other they're carrying the light. In every case, these are stories that shrink the world down to the last things left standing for the last people left standing. Max drowns the horrors of his dead family and his chain of victims out in the noise of the last of the V8 interceptors. Furiosa forges herself into a weapon to liberate her people from the world that has taken her away from them. Butler tells children the story of The Empire Strikes Back to remind them that the world used to be there, and that stories used to have meaningful moral endings. That there is still good in the world. That there is still light to be carried. Just as the father and son keep that light guttering and small and somehow still there, close to their chests. In every case, these are stories about the enforcement of frontiers. When civilization is stripped away, the only thing that's left behind is our limits. How far can you go on one tank of gas? How quickly can you outrun, outthink, or if you have to, outfight your oppressors? Can you make it to the cellar before the dragon arrives? Can you make sure that the kids do? Your life, measured in sips and bites, breaths and footsteps. The constant now replacing the inconstant soon, living not just in the moment but for the moment in every sense. And that's the horror here for me. The moment that overtakes the leads, their inevitable conflict, the inevitable bloodshed, and ultimately how beautifully this story embodies the evitative case. To be afraid. To be afraid. And to know that's all there is or ever will be. Expertly done. The dreams of the artists are causing many a restless and feverish night. Someday, soon, the call would come, when the stars were ready. The time would be easy to know, for then mankind would have become as the flash fiction contest, free, wild, beyond both good and evil, with laws and morals thrown aside, and all men shouting and killing and reveling in joy. Then the liberated flash fiction contest would teach them new ways to shout and kill and revel and enjoy themselves, and all the earth would flame with a holocaust of ecstasy and freedom.
PseudoPod will be kicking off the 5th round of flash fiction contest this year, beginning in August. The submissions window will extend from August 15th to September 15th, so get those inner demons out and put them to task. You may submit any one piece of original unpublished horror fiction, no more than 500 words in length. For more rules, regulations, fine print, and other ancient horrors, head on over to forum.escapeartists.net. We look forward to reading your stories. And yeah, we know they're true.
We rely on you to pay our authors and cover our server costs, as well as help pay for our back-end IT support and pay our staff. We have a lot of expenses. We're running 4 shows, paying narrators, authors, and staff. Money is very tight, and we need you. So please, if you can, donate you'll be helping bring our work to hundreds of thousands. So click on pseudopod.org and go to Feed the Pod. There you can either donate or subscribe for as little as $5 a month. We'll see you next week with Till the Road Runs Out by Luciano Morano and read by Archivos' own Dave freaking Robertson. Then, As Now will be a production of Escape Artists Inc. and released under a Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial No Derivatives license. We'll see you then. In the meantime, keep carrying the light. And we'll see you next week.